Part 2. So this word Alef Lamed Yod, it's kind of like a derivative of Alef Lamed Yod Hei. So as we were saying last couple of weeks, before the great and Hagadol Venorah, the fearful, dreadful, awesome, grand, glorious, spectacular day of Yahweh that's coming. Before that, he's going to send Eliah Hanavah, Elijah the prophet, but it could mean I'm going to send the regard of my Torah being the truth, which for the duration of the curse of 2,730 years, the curse was your enemies would lie to you, would demand of you that you don't recognize the truth, that you don't even read his words, that you have no access. And so I can look back and say, if the end of the curse was 2010, if we've talked about that, how do we even know what year it is and blah, blah. But if I can look back and say, for the sake of conversation, for the sake of argument, we could say, okay, let's say the curse was over 2010, starting at 721 BC when Assyria conquered Samaria. Okay, so I could look back at all those people that were under the curse, and so they were lied to, false authority, lied, cheated, and stolen from and murdered. And they were under a curse of Yahweh, not the devil. It was the curse of Yahweh on his own people. Gosh, well, how much condemnation is their own fault? I can't say there was any. I can't even go there. I don't know. So I can look back at the Inquisition and the Holocaust and all kinds of other things that happened over the last 3,000 years and say, I don't know how he's going to judge that. I have no idea, because people were only taught lies. And they had no access to the real truth. That was the nature of the curse. That's what he said. But now that we're on the outside of that, a whole different ballgame, whole different way things work. So if I can say he's going to send Alef Lamed Yod Hei, the Nun Bet, Aleph, he's going to allow to arrive the Nun Bet, the fruition, the blossoming of Alef Lamed Yod Hei. Lamed Yod means my Lamed, my true teachings, my Torah, which is the Alef Lamed Yod. I have taught, I have sent forth. Alef Lamed means to move in the motion toward. If it's a Alef Lamed with a hyphen of another word, motion toward. So the Aleph is this motion toward, this bull, this ox, this pulling everything toward my Lamed, but Lamed Yod means mine. What else is mine? He said Israel is mine. We were reading, he says, I made you mine. In Ezekiel 16, Israel is his personal possession. In that word tafarda, Israel is his crowning glory. When he gets all dressed up and he puts on his final hat, that's Israel. And if Israel betrays him, he'll prove Israel is his glory by smacking and beating up and terrorizing Israel himself by the use of Israel's enemies or the devil or whatever that looks like. But when Israel listens to his voice, it's like he goes on to say that Israel was majestic in beauty, but Israel became narcissistic, self-referential, and took it all on and lost it all. Gosh, that's Ezekiel 16. So the whole idea of if anybody were to try to plunder his covenant, like I mentioned last week, the Jesus Person Pocket Promise Book, Jesus people were a thing. You know, that movie that came out a few months ago about Chuck Smith and Costa Mesa, that started the whole thing called the Jesus People movement, early 70s. and to say, hey, let's just take the good stuff and spit out the bones, as they say. And it's like, what part of Yahweh saying, sit down on the Sabbath day, bones, bones, Sukkot, bones, gristle, can't chew that. It's like, what? Hey, give me some bacon bits. We'll spit out the Moedim, the Sabbath day. What? Anybody who pillages and plunders the covenant or scoffs it as bozo, they're getting their own way back on their own head. That's the mishpat. That's the justice. See, he's not going to arbitrarily, why, you darn, boom, boom. He does, no, it's your own way back on your own head. That's the balancing of scales. That's mishpat, and he says it all the time. Well, then that sets up verse 20. And it says, Vav Pei Resh Shin Tav Yod. Well, so the translators have said Pei Resh Shin means to spread out. And then the next word is Ayin Lamed Yod Vav. Well, Ayin Lamed means above, aliyah, to rise up. It means to be promoted to a higher dignity of success, of you got a menial job and now you got a better job. You were disregarded, now you've got this position of regard. When the disciples went to the upper room in the book of Acts, that upper room is the aliyah room. To make aliyah in Israel means you get to move to Israel and live there. Or even if you go visit Israel, it's called making aliyah. Say, hey, I got this chance to be elevated to a higher dignity. That's the word aliyah, but this is aliyo. So that's the vav suffix meaning his. So something is raised up. And if you look at the word parash and say, well, that means to spread out, and then the next word is rashati, reshin tav yod. Well, in the dictionary, reshin tav means net, like a fishing net. And then vav nun, tav pei shin. Well, tav pei shin means seize, capture, grasp, or caught in a snare. So it's translated, I'm going to throw my net and capture in my net, like fishermen throwing a net out over the sea or the lake and pulling in whatever they got there. And then the next word is bet mem zadi vav dalet tav yod. And I had mentioned last week, there's a whole bunch of words in these passages here, tav yod suffix. So here's 3 or 4 of them. Briti, parashti, rashti, and here bamazodti. Next word, vav hey bet yod aleph vav tav yod. There's t, the tav yod hey vav. Boy, that's a long word. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 letters in that word. So it basically is translated in Stone's Tanakh that I'm gonna throw my net over them, capture them, and they will be snared, because the bematzud, zadi vav dalet means to hunt or capture, or it means a net. So mem means the object which captures, which would be a cage or a net, and bet means in. And then here's this 10-letter word. Then the next word is Babala, like Babylon. And then it goes on to say, Vena shafet ti, there's another word with the tav yod suffix. So shafet is mishpat, which is the word for judge, judgment. But here they say it's the word contend. So see, mishpat, the place of judgment, or the way judgment works. Mishpat is the balancing of scales, but here it's noon, shin pei tet, tav yod. So the tav yod means I will or I have. Noon, shin pei tet. Well, if shin pei tet is to exact a judgment, what's this nooning? Well, it's the action. Well, how's he going to noon shin pei tet? And it's translated contend. What does that mean, contend? I'm going to contend with them. Argue? I'm going to argue? I'm going to reason? I'm going to yell at you? What does that mean? Contention is this grievous sort of conflict back and forth. And then the word with him there, aleph tav vav, and then shin mem is the word there. And then here's this word, the last words in this verse, mem ayin lamed vav. Well, Ayin Lamed is a yoke, but Mem Ayin Lamed actually means to, well, remember that word Ayin Lamed means raised up high, like Aliyah. So the Mem Ayin Lamed is the place or the location of being raised up. So Israel had this tendency to go up onto what they call high places, a mound or a hill or the highest hill. They'd go up to the highest places around and worship other deities there. So the word Mem Ayin Lamed is actually translated as the high place. They'd put an altar there, they'd burn incense there, they'd plant a tree there, they'd do whatever they are doing up there. You know, I might go on a hike to a high place just for the sake of going on to a hike, Mount Whitney or, you know, highest place in the continental US down in California. That doesn't mean a high place is a bad thing. It's what you do there. So Mem Ayin Lamed means raising, lifting, or high place, but the word Mem Ayin Lamed, if you look that up in the dictionary, it means to act unfaithfully or treacherously. Treacherously means you seem like you're doing one thing, but you're doing another. You're sneaky, like a spy would be treacherous. And then Bet Yod, the last word here, means with me or as mine. So it basically, I will contend with him there treacherously asher ma'ali be. So in other words, he says, again, this is like mishpat. So is the word contend, or is it the word nun shafet, similar to mem shafet? It means I'm going to take your own treachery and dump it back on your own head. That's mishpat. Whatever you do is coming back on you. You better behave yourself, because even David, who was forgiven, please don't take your Ruach HaKodesh from me, he knew that whatever he did was going to come back on him. And if he thought that he got away with something, nobody gets away with anything. You can be forgiven, but do you still have to suffer your own way on your own head? Gosh, you better be careful what you do, even if you're forgiven. What's this really mean? Okay, there's another way to read this. So this is what I'm going to try to make the point here. Pereshin also means a knight on horseback. It's where you get the word for Persian. These guys on horses, and they spread out. They spread out over the land on horseback, and it's like a cavalry, a military. But it also means to make clear and distinct and explain. And if you make something clear and distinct, if you spread everything out, now you start looking at the individual things and you're saying, now I'm gonna separate this from everything else. That's a synonym with the word kadosh. I'm going to try to lay everything out and see exactly what it is, so that I can identify what's what, and then I can make the distinction between what's kadosh and what's halal. And remember, Yahweh got mad at his priests for not making distinct the kadosh from the halal, the holy from the secular, the kadosh from the profane, the common. What is kadosh and what is just everything else? Israel is, this was written on the headband of the high priest, kadosh LeYahweh. Israel is kadosh LeYahweh. It means sacred, betrothed, set apart. The betrothed one is the one who's not like anybody else, special, separate, different, distinct, uncommon. So this is verse 20 of Ezekiel 17, and it says, I have made distinct, clearly explaining, and then this word Ayin Lamed Yod Vav. Ayin Lamed Yod means my raising up him. Is he speaking of Israel? I have made clearly distinct to Israel my call on his being, kadosh, not like anybody else. In your blood live. You were rejected by even those who bore you, and I made you mine. Well, that's the alio, to realize what it means to be his personal possession. That's to be lifted up to the highest dignity. And then the word rashti, well, reshin, tav yod is the suffix, but reshin tav means net or snare. I have Well, the word Aleph Resh Shin Tav means betrothed. So it's written as if Yahweh's going to take those who have betrayed him and catch them in his snare and a trap and take them to Babylon. But wait a minute. The other way to read this is, but I have told you, the ones who regard me, kadoshli, I regard you as kadoshli, and I regard you as the highest of everything that was ever created. And I'm going to grab you in my net. And then the word Bavnun Tav Peshin, seize, capture, caught. He's holding us absolutely not only secure, but out of reach of everybody else. And then this word Bet Mem Zadivav Dalet Tav Yod. Zadivav Dalet means to hunt, capture, net. Mem Zadivav Dalet, Dalet means enticing. So what is it that captures? Mem Zadivav Dalet means fortress or stronghold. Well, the word chesed, tender loving kindness, but chet samik is his refuge, his safety, his oz, ayin Zion, fortress, like is citadel high up in the rocks, insurmountably high, out of reach. This is all speaking of the promises that we've been talking about that he made to his people. Then here's this big 10-letter word, Vav Hei Bet Yod Aleph Vav Tav Yod Hei Vav. Well, the Yod Hei Vav, Yahoo, like Yeshayahu, those three letters, well, remember I said, any words that are composed of Yods, Heys, and Vavs basically means to exist. So I could sit there and says, I have Tav Yod, I have, or I will. Vav suffix means he will exist. Well, that means when he says, as I live, he's the Elohim of life. He created life. He calls himself alive. And so how do you know? How do you prove you're alive? How do you prove that you live? I'm his. Ani ledodi vedodi li. I am his and he is mine. That proves that I live. And if anybody wants to argue using English or Latin or some other phrase about the Sedeke Vi Act, for example, who's dead and who's alive and who's the fictional character and blah, blah, blah. Ani lododi vedodi li. Yahweh's a vote of Israel. I am his and he is mine. He's the Elohim of life. I live because I am his. This word, Vav Hei Bet. Hei Bet means to give. Aleph Hei Bet is the word for love. It's the volitional giving, which is love. So even though it says Vav Hei Bet, there's an essence of love there. Bet Yod Aleph, like Naviah, means, translated prophet, means to arrive or to enter or to happen. But then there's this word Aleph Vav Tav. Well, that's the word for oath, or the stipulations agreed upon, which is a synonym with the word dabar, speak, stipulation, oath, I swear, Kaf Yod Amer declares, Lakan Ka Amer Adonai Chai Ani. This is like Aleph Vav Tav. Well, that's the letter of the Aleph-Beit. So to sit there and say the meanings of the letters of the alphabet, they're carried by the pictures of ox and camel and fishhook, but that's not what they're about. They're retained and carried by those pictures. What they're about is his sworn oath, his brit between Yahweh Zavot and Israel. And again, Zavot, that's what he calls himself, Zadi Bet Aleph Vav Tav. And I can say Zadi is, well, Zadi Bet Aleph is an army, a legion. It multiplies a mass, a horde. Aleph Vav Tav is a letter of the alphabet, a sign, a symbol, a stipulation of the oath. But Bet is to be in or with or in-housed, and Zadi is a blossoming, a flowering, a bird on the wing. So you could say the Zavot really could be translated, instead of armies or hosts, as the flowering of the essence captured within the orthography of every letter of the alphabet as it's explaining his sworn oath relationship between him and Israel. That's what the word Zavot means. But you'll never see it translated that way. And this word is saying the same thing. I will capture, I will make clear and distinct, just like I promised, those of my people that I have raised up on high, like putting in his headdress, that I call my own in my fortress, my stronghold, that have enticed me with what? By being his Hanani, his cute little darling, Daisy, those who listen to what he said, and those who will do what he said. Those who will sit down on Shabbat. Those who will keep his Moedim. Those who will love the truth. Those who will treat each other with kindness and justice, doing righteousness. And it says here, I will bring or cause to arrive the oath as stipulated by every letter of the alphabet which exists. It's not a fantasy. It's not imaginary. And then the word Bet Lamed Hei, Babylon. Oh, Bet is a gateway. Prefix bet can mean in the condition of. Bet Lamed Hei, blah, literally means worn out, mixture, terrified, disaster, nightmare. And it's like, oh gosh, is that the coming of the tribulation? And it's like, oh my gosh. Wait a minute. The end of the 2,730-year curse is to say that time of being lied to, the time of mixture, the time of being terrified, the time of being a disastrous nightmare has run its course and been accomplished, hasn't it? Isn't that why he stipulated in Ezekiel chapter 4 that the time of the curse on the northern kingdom, he had exactly to lay on his side 390 days, a year and a month. Not 392, 390. And then in Leviticus 26, he said he'd multiply the curse by 7 if his people didn't come back. Well, 7 times 390, 2,730. And if we can trust the reckoning of the years from, maybe we can't, as I said, there's people talk about that, but nevertheless, 721 BC, 2,730 brings you to 2010. There being no year zero, goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. Well, then that means I can say the gateway of nothingness, or because bet means gateway. That's like the nation's gate. What nation? The city's gate. What city? The city of Babel, which means confusion, mixture, terrified, disaster, nightmare. That's the curse. It's like the compound. The curse has been worn out. Well, as soon as we hit 2010, I can choose to believe that the curse that Yahweh imposed on the northern kingdom is concluded, is over, is run its course, and is now fizzled out to nothing. It doesn't exist any longer. I can choose to believe that. In which case, that's the meaning of the word Bet Lamed Hei. Because Lamed Hei as a suffix means to her, or belonging to her, or this was imposed upon her. And remember that I can, bet as a gateway, and remember what Yahweh said. He said, there's this gateway to Jerusalem, and they kept dragging in stuff to buy and sell on the Shabbat. And he says, if you guys would just do what I said and regard my instructions, then through this very gate will come riding your princes in pomp and glory and fine clothes and nice horses and, their military army, and you guys can be real proud of yourselves. But if you betray me and you keep doing stuff I told you not to do, and you treat each other with unkindness and injustice, then your same princes, instead of coming riding out on their horses and looking real nice, will be whipped and beaten and dragged in chains by their enemies, drugged through the streets, getting their flesh ripped off. Your choice, which is it going to be? And it's like, whoa, so to look at this bet, that's like, whoa, boy, that's a gateway. What do you say about gateways? Well, the word chet bet, chababa, is dear in your heart. Chet bet, your bosom. And it's like, if we're in his bosom, that's like being caught in his trap, caught in his net, his retina. Retina is also Reshin Tov, which is your eye. And remember, he says, if you, my people Israel, would just listen to my voice and do what I say and love my instructions of my Torah, like the twinkle of your eye, like the pupil of your eye. And he says, whoever even thinks to do anything to you is jamming his own finger into his own eyeball. Gosh. Have you ever had anything jammed in your eyeball, a thorn or your own finger, a tool or a sharp thing flying? You know what? Oh, man. And Yahweh says, we're the pupil of his eye, the sparkle of his eye, the twinkle in his eye is us if we will listen to him. And then it goes on to say, contend, balance scales. I will cause, that's nooning, the shafet, the balancing of scales. And the verse we mentioned last week, I can't remember offhand where it's found, but he said, mishpat like water, zadaka like a raging river. What does water do? Water finds its lowest balance, flat level. Mishpat like water. Mishpat always has to find balance at its lowest place. And he told us wickedness weighs nothing. If we do zadaka, if we do righteousness, it puts something in our side of the scale. And any of the evil that the evil people do on their side of the scale can't outweigh us doing righteousness. What's righteousness? 1 John chapter 3, doing what he said, doing the Torah is righteousness. So we do what he said in the Torah, the Lamed, his personal Lamed Yod, Alef Lamed Yod, this is my stuff, Alef Lamed Tav Yod, that I have committed myself to and expressed, Alef Lamed Yod Hei. And when you guys do righteousness, the only way for scales to balance, because that weights down one side, zadaka like a raging river. Well, when something drops, any water up here is going to rush down here real fast. But zadaka is not just righteousness, it's also victory, deliverance, and salvation. So if you know the meaning of his words, you realize he's giving us these pictures. And when he says, I'm going to noon, shin pei tet, it's not just the word contend. I'm not going to contend with you. He says, I'm going to make it so everything that you do, which is righteousness, is going to cause victory, deliverance, and salvation to flood in raging. Nothing can stop it. Just like water seeking level, seeking to fill up and balance. And all the injustice that your enemies have done, we will get repaid for 3,000 years worth of accrued, let's just say, stuff in the account. And when he says he's going to store up the wealth of the wicked and give it to the righteous, it's not just arbitrary, whimsical, it's mishpat. And then when it says Aleph Tav Vav, with him, his Aleph Tav. What's our Aleph Tav? His promise, his sworn oath. But see, I have to be able to give a value to this word Aleph Tav. It's not just eto. It's he promised us. So now it's mine. And then Shem there is not just there. Where? In the wilderness that he's going to contend with it? No, there then at that time, because that's his Shem, that's his name, that's because it is what it is. And then when it says Mem Ayin Lamed Vav, Asher Mem Ayin Lamed Bet Yod, it's like the word Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, to exist. Aleph Hey Yod Hey. Hey Yod Hey is to exist. Aleph I will. It's like a dot. And Asher is a straight line, and there's another dot. And he's saying, listen, if you act treacherously, you're going to get treachery. But whatever you put in the scales is yoked with, balancing with a straight line to whatever you get in the scales from me, of mine. So to say with the treacherous, he's going to act treacherously, that's one way to read it. The other way to read it is, whatever we yoke ourselves to of his, we're yoked to. So I can choose to yoke myself to the truth, to believing this to be true. If I go back at the end of verse 21, the next verse, it says, Va'et kol ma baracho, and Aleph Tav, all, Kaf Lamed, well, bet resh het means fugitive, contraband, smuggled, bankrupt, runaway, elope, somebody on the run. Mem is the place of, or the shelter, and you could say, well, but resh het is the word, like the word ruach is breath or wind, or so you could say every place that a fugitive, contraband, somebody bankrupt or runaway finds shelter. There's Bekal Aleph Gimel Pei Yod Vav. Aleph Gimel Pei means the wing of a bird, flanking an army, or the flanker position, like in football, if you have an end receiver and he's way out at the side, at the wing, he's separated from the rest of the group. He's way out there. It also means renegade or outlaw, flanker position. So to flank an army, if you've got a battle of, you might say, infantry, and somebody runs around the end so it's way out. So you could say anybody who's like outside of the group, anybody who's like on the run, hiding out, or just outcast, just, you're not one of us. You have to, and then it says, Bechereb, with sword. Chereb is sword or drought. Yod Pei Lamed Vav. Well, that Pei Lamed Vav means separate, make distinct, delouse, look for bugs. It's the root of the word for paleo. So here's another word that means separate or make distinct, like the word paresh, like the word bet dalet, not like anybody else, like the word kadoshi. See, this is all about not being part of the group. This is part of not being part of the norm, but being his set apart one. The next word is Vav He Nun Shin Aleph Resh Yod Mem. Well, Shin Aleph Resh is the word for remnant, survivor, or leaven. He Nun Shin Hanash is to lift up or raise up. Nun Shin Aleph is to raise up, very similar to the Nun Samik, just like Tet and Tav, sometimes replaceable letters with each other. Samik and Shin are sometimes replaceable letters with each other. Next words, Lakal Ruach, every spirit or every wind, Yod Pei Resh Shin. Well, there's that word, to express clearly, explain, distinguish, clarify, interpret, keep aloof, separated. It's like somebody getting in a boat and sailing off to sea. They're no longer on the continent of land. They're just out in the ocean somewhere. Or a knight on horse, which is not common. He's got the title Sir. He's not like everybody else. So it's just like the word Kadosh. Ve Yadatam, Tav Mem suffix, and the word Yada is to know. Yod Dalet Ayin, or Dalet Ayin Tav is the word for knowledge. Ki Ani Yahweh Debarti, that I am Yahweh Debarti, I have spoken. So this is the upshot of the whole thing. When Yahweh speaks, that's it. Well, duh, what's the surprise? The surprise is Deuteronomy 13, whatever Yahweh said has been told that it's not it. Done away with, no longer for us. Whatever the excuse, the upshot of this entire chapter, Ana Yahweh Tabarti, Kiani Yahweh, that I am Yahweh. When I speak, they will know, Yadatam. I'm now reading the verse backwards. Yod Pei Reshin. When I speak, it is a clear expression, very distinct, not like any other voice. Ruach, lakal Ruach, not like any other spirit. When the spirit of Yahuwah, when the Ruach of Yahuwah debars, it's absolutely true. But then the previous word, remnant survivors, I mean, again, I'm reading the verse backwards. Remnant survivors, delouse, look for bugs, realize is paleo, realize that the paleo has no bugs in it. It's deloused. It's something wonderful, special, different than any other. And those people that had, look, I just can't go to church anymore. I just can't hang out in the bar anymore. I just can't go to the football games with my friends and think that whoop-de-doo, that's a halftime show at the, it's nothing. Those who were finding themselves alienated from their culture, their religion, their country, their family, perhaps, that they thought that, what's the matter with you? You're a heathen infidel. You're an outlaw, renegade. No, what they realized is that nothing was kadosh except the words, the debar of Yahweh. And finally, when you find the essence, the reality of Yahuwah's words, you realize there just isn't anything else, which is why you couldn't fit in with all those other things that were supposedly what life is about. See, if that's what this verse 21 is talking about, then you realize those of his people who are saying, I just want to know your word so I can do your stuff, so I can be your people. Those are the ones that he's saying he's got caught up in his net, in his fortress, in his heart, in his eye, that our enemies can't get to. So all this other talk of enemies afoot, whether it's microscopic bugs or robots or economics or military, it's like all I can figure is that, look at Yahweh is my Elohim. That's all there is. If we go ahead and look at Ezekiel 20, I mentioned a couple things there, so we'll just kind of skim through that and take it at English face value. Start with verse 3 here. Son of man, speak to the elders of Israel, say to them, thus says Adonai Yahweh, is it to inquire of me that you've come? See, they didn't ever want to listen to his voice, and now they're sending people to come to Ezekiel and say, hey, could you petition Yahweh? He's not listening to us, but he seems to be talking to you. Could you put in a plug for a request? As I live, Yahweh speaking again, I will not relate to your inquiries. It's like, I've heard people say my whole life, just ask. Just start praying. Just ask him anything. Talk to him. Yeah, but here he's saying he's not going to relate to the inquiries. Why? So they've got that verse of the book of Proverbs. If you don't listen to my voice, I can't listen to your prayers. So obviously his own people, his own princes and priests are representing a people group that are not caring what he said. So he's not going to relate to their inquiries, meaning their prayers are just bouncing off the ceiling. Verse 4, won't you rebuke them? Won't you rebuke, Son of Man? Inform them of the abominations of their fathers. It's not even of their own abominations. He's saying, tell them of the abomination, which is to say the incorrect cultural practices, religious practices, liturgy, dogma, doctrines of your forefathers that you guys haven't bothered to take the time to determine whether they're right or not. Say to them, thus says Adonai Yahweh, on the day that I chose Israel, well, that sounds like the beginning there of Ezekiel 16, or that tells of the time back with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moshe. I raised my hand in oath. So that's why I say, I raised my hand. Well, that the open hand is a kaf. Yod means my, so kaf yod is like this picture. If I raised my hand in oath, is in brackets here, for the seed of the house of Jacob. So he's going back to the house of Jacob as a distinction between Israel and Esau, as a distinction between Isaac versus Ishmael, as a distinction between Abraham and the culture of where Abraham came from, which was the Chaldees, and I made myself known to them in the land of Egypt. Okay, so besides Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this is the house of Jacob, the 12 sons, so something about in the land of Egypt. So I'm saying we could read this and zero in to say, what did he specifically say there? Basically, he clarified himself at the day of Pesach and then unleavened bread. I raised my hand for them, saying, I am Yahweh your Elohim. The end of verse 5. So if you look back at that, then he says, Ani Yahweh El Hikam. Aleph Nun Yod, Yod Hei Vav Hei. I'm Yahweh your Elohim. He didn't say I'm the Lord your God. Ani Yahweh Elohekam. And there's some people who say, hey, look, this name Yod Hei Vav Hei, that was the name of some Egyptian deity, some Canaanite, blah, blah, whatever. It's like, listen, you can have any excuse you want for regarding or not regarding, or how do you pronounce it? But the fact that he said this, I choose to regard it. Anybody else that wants to argue, you can believe whatever you want. You believe whatever you want. You can disbelieve whatever you want. That's on you. Goodbye. Argue amongst yourselves. It doesn't matter. I choose to just plug my head in right here and believe these words. He says, Ani Yahweh El Hikam, your Elohim. So, okay, then the other thing was good enough for Granny and Uncle Joe, but this is good enough for me to just say, okay, I'm going with this. And if somebody wants to argue, they can argue. If somebody wants to just say, what did he say, and how do we wrap our mind around that, then we can have a conversation. I made myself known to them in the land of Egypt. I raised my hand for them, saying, I am Yahweh Elohekam. On the day I raised my hand for them to take them out of the land of Egypt to the land that I had sought out for them, flowing with milk and honey, a splendor for all the lands. You see, that barren desert over there now, that's not what it was. You see in the days of Abraham and King David and everybody running around in the desert and the rocks, and it was a lush garden. Things have changed over the years. And I said to them, every man cast away the detestable of his eyes. Do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Back when I was in college, I knew a guy whose last name was Cohen, which is priest. He was Jewish. But they had Egyptian idols in their house, he and his roommate. And I remember thinking, hey, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be doing that. I mean, I didn't know last name Cohen meant priest, but it's like, you're Jewish. Why do you have Egyptian idols in your house? It's art. He said, get rid of them, cast away. He didn't say, how dare you have these things? I'm going to kill you now. He said, okay, as of now, I'm making you my own. You belong to me. Now get rid of those other things. Like, get rid of what other things? Get rid of the other things that aren't his. I'm Yahweh, your Elohim. Don't defile yourselves. In other words, it's not just, well, they bother him. He says, no, it'll defile you. So if you look up the word for abomination, and if you look at the word for defile, it brings corruption. It's almost like you bring these things into your house and it'll give you cancer. The word for abomination is like this thick thing that doesn't allow blood to flow. It's like your plumbing drain clogged up. That type of a thing. Maybe you can't think straight. Maybe your whole system gets plugged. Get rid of those things which are not of him. Every man, he's saying doing it for yourself. He's not even giving you a list. He's apparently expecting all of us to take these things to heart, take these things to mind for ourselves and say, what does he want me to do? Every man cast away the detestable of his eyes, of his own eyes. What's the detestable? It's I think the word detestable is the word for like lizard and reptile, swarming. And it's like, well, you have to, if you can look up the actual words, what is it that trips me up? Is it the same thing that might trip you up? Every man for himself. Get rid of the things which distract you, that trip you up from being Yahuwah's people. Is it the internet? Is it literature? Is it TV? I'm not going to give anybody a list. The question is, what is it that will distract you and pull you away and trip you up from having Yahweh be your Elohim? The next verse, verse 8, but they rebelled against me, didn't want to listen to me. Not only did they not listen, they didn't want to listen to him. No man of them cast away the detestable. None of them did. He's sitting there saying, I want to make you my people. You're going to be my Tafarda. You're going to be my Chababi. You're going to be my Hanani. And whatever. None of the people of those previous generations had any regard of his being his favored. They did not forsake the idols of Egypt. So I had thought to pour out my wrath upon them, to spend my anger on them in the midst of the land of Egypt. I mean, he was going to wipe out, he was going to destroy all his people right there while they were still in slavery in Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name, that it be not desecrated in the eyes of the nations in whose midst they were, before whose eyes I'd made myself known to them, promising to take them out of the land of Egypt. You see, our forefathers provoked the bejeebers out of him repeatedly, constantly, continually. And I could dare say, if you look through human history, for whatever the reason, we're under the curse, or we just didn't care, or blah, blah, we inherited customs or whatever. But I could say that on record, Samuel, David, Noah, Moshe, Daniel, how many people throughout history are regarded as having a heart for his heart? So for us to say, please make yourself known to me, please show me your ways, please help my eyes, help me to see the things which are distracting so I can get rid of them. I want to have a heart for you. I want to have a mind for you. I want to have eyes for you. I choose to be that person. Will you please facilitate it, Abba Yahweh? That's a pretty rare thing. Amongst his people who are the Kadosh, the Parash, the Pereshim of all the earth. His people were bet down, it's set apart of all the earth, and they still wouldn't do it. He promised to take him out of Egypt. Verse 10, so I took them out of the land of Egypt and brought them to the wilderness. You see, the word wilderness is midbar, which also means place of words, ma-dabar. I brought them to my language. I could say, well, right now he's taken us out of the world and brought us to his language. How many of us are going to be at this place of his language and value him with a type of distinction that's not like in any other place? I gave them my decrees and laws and made known to them, through which, if a man fulfills them, he will live through them. I had never had his decrees and laws, his ways, his instructions known. People talked about things, talked about the law, talked about what we had a regard or disregard of his law. One of his laws was bring your tithe and you'll get blessed. Okay, so we had that law, but any of the other laws were disregarded pretty much. But that was the way it was. But here he says, I brought them to my place of words. So I can look at this verse 10 of Ezekiel 20 and say, well, that's like us. How many of us now, given the use or the functional ability to regard what did he say, because we're fugitive, renegade, heretical outlaws, that we're not part of sitting there getting orated to, we'll stand up and say, the paleo, how wonderful. I want to be his people. Through which if a man fulfills them, he will live through them. Was that eternal life or just life on earth? Either way, it's life. I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, to know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies them. So the Sabbath is a sign between me and them. So for somebody else to say, hey, we changed the day, we changed the Moedim, that's not between Yahweh and Israel. Okay, thank you, done, got it. I understand now. I didn't understand, but I understand now. Thank you. I have nothing more to do with that, and I choose to have something to do with this. To know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies them. There's something about keeping the Sabbath day affects our ability to know. We get it. Okay, we get it. You don't keep the Sabbath day, you don't know. You won't get it. You just won't get it until you decide to keep the Sabbath day. So last week, Carla speaking, and the week before, Sal was talking about keeping the Sabbath day in the Moedim. If you don't pick up a horn or lay on your car horn or blow a trumpet on the day of Yom Teruah, you're not going to know, because Yom Teruah is a Shabbat. It's a Shabbat Shabbaton. The Moedim are Sabbath days. Yom Kippur, Sukkot, some people is coming up, hence in front of us. There's time to consider for this year. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They rebelled against me even in spite of the words, the language, you could say, ba midbar. They did not follow my decrees and spurn my laws, through which, if a man fulfills them, he will live for them. He said it again. Remember, Nam Yahweh, what he says is the way it is. So when he says, if a man fulfills them, he will live through them, that word is bet, the prefix letter bet. It means in, on, with, among, through, or even against. These instructions he gave us, if we keep them, there's life there. He commanded it to be, and that's what it is, regardless of any other philosophy or doctrine to the contrary. And they desecrated my Sabbaths exceedingly. Desecrated my Sabbaths exceedingly. How do you desecrate it a little bit? How do you desecrate it exceedingly? How do you have no regard? Gee, what if you throw it away, change it, and make a law that you have to? See, Constantine, from what I understand, made a law back for the Roman Empire that not only did you have to work on Saturday, you had to not work on Sunday, and anybody that would break that, you're a criminal. That's a felony, and you'll be beaten up, tortured, thrown in jail, all your stuff taken away. I mean, that's part of the curse. The overlords of our enemies denying us able to do what he said. Gosh, talk about the freedom now. So I had thought to pour out my wrath upon them in the wilderness to make an end of them. But verse 14 of Ezekiel 20, but I acted for the sake of my name, for the sake of his name. You see, he, as I mentioned last week, he has this big hang-up, is something about his name, the sake of his name, for the reputation of his name, for this reputation. So if we keep the Sabbath day and his Moedim and call him Yahweh and learn his language, we're exalting his name, because all that stuff has to do with his name. To keep yourself walking in righteousness because of his name, for his name's sake. But if you have a different day, different festivals, different holidays, different name, it's not on account of his name. So for us to make a big deal about his name, Kadosh is to make a big deal, sacred, sanctified, set apart unto Yahweh or regarding Yahweh. To make Kadosh the name Yahweh. four colors, blue, purple, red, white, the embroidery colors. It's like, who cares? He just designated, 5 minutes, he designated those four colors. So for me to say, okay, I'm going to make those four colors my heraldry. Blue, purple, red, white with gold thread. Okay, why? Because he said that's his Shem. He's there. He's at that, which is why he gave those embroidery colors all through the book of Leviticus. It's his preference. Verse 14 of Ezekiel 20, but I acted for the sake of my name, that I should not be desecrated in the eyes of the nations, before whose eyes I'd taken them out. He says, listen, I made a really big deal about rescuing my people from being slaves in Egypt and taking them out. Oh, this is my people, and I'm going to kill them all now? Well, he's the big scary monster God of the Old Testament. And it's like, well, yeah. But he didn't want that to be his only reputation. So he kept giving them opportunity after opportunity to come back. I also raised my hand in oath against them in the wilderness, not to bring them to the land I have given. Okay, 40 years, you guys can't come into the land. That wasn't plan A, that was plan B. A land that flows with milk and honey, a splendor for all the lands. All this because they spurned my laws, did not follow my decrees, they desecrated my Sabbaths, because their heart kept going after their idols. Get rid of the things that make your heart go after idols. What's an idol? Elohim Achrim. Anything that's a graphic that represents something other than what he told our forefathers. Moshe, book of Deuteronomy, book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. If he didn't tell our forefathers, well, it's like, well, what about all the New Testament accoutrements, all the New Testament graphics and symbols and the dove and the chalice and the sun and the blah, blah, blah. It's like, whoa, are those idols? Are those idolatrous symbols? Is it anything our forefathers would have recognized? What about the holy days, Christmas, Easter, Halloween, Sunday? Are those idols? Are those things that make me not want to walk in his ways? I must rip them out of my eyes and my heart then, out of my mind. Verse 17, but my eye pitied them rather than destroying them, so I didn't put an end to them in the wilderness. Verse 18, I said to their children in the wilderness, do not follow the practices of your fathers and don't observe their laws. Don't defile yourselves with their idols. He was giving the next generation a chance. Come on, don't do what's your family custom. I'm Yahweh, your Elohim. Follow my decrees and observe my laws and fulfill them. Sanctify my Sabbaths. Why make a big stinking deal about the Sabbath? Because he does. He keeps making a big deal about the Sabbath. They shall be a sign between me and you, for you to know that I am Yahweh your Elohim. What that means is he says, and I will know that you're my people by keeping the Sabbath day. That's the one sign that you're really listening and you're really taking it to heart and you really believe me and trust me and I'm your Elohim and you're my people. Ani ladodi vedodi li. Keep the Sabbath day. How do you keep it? Desecrate it? Really exceedingly desecrate it, or keep it? How do you keep it? Got to figure that out. But the children rebelled against me. They didn't follow my decrees. Didn't observe my laws to fulfill them, through which, if a man fulfills them, he will live through them. How many times does he keep having to say it? He says it once, and it's the law of the universe. He says this, 3, 4 times? They desecrated my Sabbath, so I spoke to pour out my wrath upon them. How many times? It was just his people have just infuriated him, the long nose, to spend my anger on them in the wilderness. But I restrained my hand, and I acted for the sake of my name, that it be not desecrated in the eyes of the nation before whose eyes I had taken them out. I also raised up my hand against them in the wilderness to scatter them amongst the nations, which we still are now, and to disperse them amongst the lands, because they didn't fulfill my laws. They spurned my decrees, desecrated my Sabbaths. Their eyes went after the idols of their father. So I too gave them decrees that were not good and laws by which they could not live. I profaned them because of their gifts of passing every firstborn before Moloch, that I might destroy them, so they should know that I am Yahweh. So there's a teaching going around, has been for the few years, that says I gave them decrees that were not good and laws by which they could not live, and says, oh, that's the Torah. It's like, what? The Torah? No, he said, I'm going to scatter you amongst them lands and give you laws that you can't live by. That's like Constantine saying you can't not work on Saturday, which if a man does, he will live if we keep the Sabbath day, if we walk in Yahweh's ways. So to come to terms with this and say, not only do we have bad translations, we have bad doctrines, bad teachings, even amongst the Messianic groups, to say this is referring to the Torah. It's like, I got to take this for myself. And then one last thing here, back down in the verse 31, again, as I live, I swear that I will not relate to your inquiries. But he then, verse 34, I will take you from the nations, gather you from the lands that you were scattered with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm, with outpoured wrath, and I'll bring you to the wilderness of the nations. Anyway, we could go into that. We're out of time. But what I'm saying is, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story, he's going to bring us back. In this idea of us coming back to Yahuwah through his words, keeping his Sabbath day, finding his favor in his face, turning him from wrath to chamad, chafatz, pleasant desire, be the people he's always wanted. He hasn't had it since David. David was the beloved. Daniel had favor. Has there ever been anybody else on the earth? Gosh, it could be us. It could be us right now, just by turning our hearts to walking in his ways. Keep the Sabbath day. Keep the Moedim. Learn his language. Anyway, here we are, Kurt. Your picture's on the screen. It's time to go.
All right. Thank you, Father, for opportunity again to get together. Keep everybody safe. And, yeah, thank you, Father. And the after show begins.